All right, Mike, I'm just going to give it a quick second while I refresh over here just to make sure. It says that we're live, but sometimes it tricks me and we're not quite. And other times it actually catches me doing things before the video. So this one looks like it is live though. Good morning. Thank you so much for tuning in to our COVID-19 series. I hope you're staying warm indoors, that you've grabbed a nice blanket and coffee or tea or whatever else, and are ready to deep dive from a legal perspective into some of our federal relief programs. So the EIDL, the PPP in specific, and just an overall CARES review by our general counsel, Mike Lazar. Mike is the general counsel for the Westminster Chamber. He also is an attorney down in Denver on the regular basis. Right now, he's operating up here north, and I'm sure his family loves him for that. But he is works with FNC Law, and you can go ahead and share the acronyms with them when you take this over because they always butcher it. But if this is your first time tuning into our videos, then you are in for a treat. We do these on a daily basis, and they're designed to either educate you about what's going on in wake of COVID. So we'll get updates from elected officials on Monday by our city. And then on Friday, it's generally county, state, and any other type of level that we might have. We also do these COVID series in the form of town halls or industry-specific town halls. You can understand how is COVID impacted a specific industry, what they're doing, and then the future of that. So we've held that with the Colorado Business Roundtable and the Motor Carriers Association. We have several others that are lined up moving forward. If you've wound up on our page because somebody shared about this video webinar, then it's your first time. We want you to keep coming back. The best way you can stay in touch with us is by liking this page, by following it, and following us on all of our platforms. So we are on Instagram and Twitter at Westy Chamber, on YouTube and on LinkedIn, Westminster Chamber of Commerce. It's important to be on all platforms, and so we leverage all of these differently for different messages. Especially during this time, we're churning out so much information, so we don't want to overload you on one singular platform. That's a lot. I always start with this, and then everyone is so relieved whenever my speakers take over. So I will turn this over, Mike, for you to share. Again, reintroduce yourself and the company or your law firm that you're with. And then if you can share with me before we do that dive into the legal scope of things, how has your industry been affected? We had a nice conversation yesterday, and I'm shocked to hear something. So I'm excited for you to share that with our audience.
Sure. Thank you, Julie. Again, my name is Mike Lazar. I'm an attorney with Feldman, Nagel, Contafio. We're a firm downtown. We are largely based in Colorado, although we also have offices in other states and a national presence. I personally am head of the civil practice group of the firm, so I handle all of the civil litigation and am in charge of overseeing much of it. I also practice as outside general counsel for a number of businesses. And of course, as you might expect, I've received a lot of questions from a lot of clients and potential clients who have had questions for me about everything that's going on. Everyone's a little bit worried and a little bit panicked. And so what I would like to do today would be to share some of my thoughts with regards to what's actually going on, perhaps share some of the advice that I've given to some of my clients to provide you all a little bit of guidance as to what you need to be thinking about as business owners right now. Before I do that, let me just talk a little bit about my business in terms of how all this has been impacted. So our firm has about, 30, 35 attorneys working at it. I would say that my group and all the civil litigators, we have been impacted, not in terms of our workload being reduced. There's a lot going on. Cases are still proceeding through the course of civil litigation as they always do, but everything is just a little bit harder. I think that the most important thing to realize is that court systems are largely shut down right now. Chief Justice Coates entered an order in the middle of last month in which he suspended all jury calls, so there are no jury trials happening anymore. And pretty much every matter that doesn't fall within, I guess, an emergency designation. So these are things like speedy trial issues, which would be criminal matters, protection orders.
Right.
And some other matters like that. Pretty much nothing is happening in the courts right now. Now, judges are ruling on motions as the attorneys submit them on behalf of their parties, but hearings aren't happening.
Wow.
Depositions, these would be the main tool that we have in the discovery process in civil litigation, where I get to sit down with somebody and ask them a whole bunch of questions and grill them over the course of the day. Those, to the extent that they are happening via video teleconference now.
Okay.
Same with mediations and settlement conferences. Everything's being done virtually, which is kind of odd. I was talking with one of the criminal defense attorneys at my firm yesterday, and he said that he spends every day in Skype court now, where he's representing his criminal defense clients via Skype, appearing in front of the judge, telling all the hearings that way. And in terms of when all this stuff is going to open up, the short answer is I don't know. The current orders, shutting most everything down is in effect through mid-May at this point. I received an order in a case of mine a couple days ago in which the judge said, yeah, don't expect this to go to trial anytime soon. Basically, I'm not expecting this thing, like any civil trial to go, or any civil case to go to trial within 6 months after everything opens up, just because all of the criminal matters are going to be prioritized first. And so why am I telling you this? Well, the main reason why I'm telling you this is so that you, as business owners who I'm sure are running into all sorts of problems with vendors of yours, clients of yours, landlords, whoever it may be, everything's being strained right now. You need to understand that there's not a quick and easy civil remedy that's out there. The wheels of justice always turn slowly. I mean, you're lucky to get into court within 6 months of filing a complaint. You're more likely to have your day in court within a year of filing your complaint. I would say all of those deadlines are going to be kicked out an extra 6 months to a year at this point, given how things are. So what that means for you and what that means for me as an attorney advising you and advising people like you is we need to get a little bit more creative with regards to how we handle legal disputes right now so that we can get a decent result for our clients and not necessarily just burn a whole bunch of money that they're going to need for other purposes. And that's what I want to get into next.
That makes sense. And thank you for that overview. I hadn't realized that virtual court. I mean, I think in a sense it helps that you're not having to drive to the courthouse constantly. There are perks to it for the attorneys for sure. We have a lot of people that are on here with us. And so I just wanted to kind of at least weave in a couple of our comments. Thank you, Kaylee, Kemsel, and Emilio. I know you guys are watching. We have a nice good morning message from Mark Clark. Thank you, Mark, for tuning in. And then we also have a couple of our counselors. It looks like Counselor Smith is on. Thank you for tuning in to our video series continually. We also have Counselor DeMont. Thank you for referencing us as kids. My mom's birthday is today, Mike. So we ended up having a phone call at 7:30 this morning, and she did the mistake of asking all of her nieces and nephews how old they thought she was. And let me tell you, they did not say kid status at all. So I am going to accept that as a compliment and keep on going. It looks like we have Vanessa DeMont and several others. Please make sure that if you have a comment or question that you type it into our window so we can get to it and that we can continue to weave it into the conversation. This is a very informal type of discussion that we like to have. And I know Mike is going to have a lot of information, so we need to break it up with some nice little sound bites. So with that being said, go ahead and take it over, Mike.
All right. So here's what I want to spend most of the time talking about today. I want to talk about the federal legislation that's been passed. And so there are two bills that y'all need to be aware of. The first is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, otherwise known as the CARES Act. And then the second is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. The CARES Act is the one that allowed for various SBA funded loans. This would include the EIDL loans that we're going to talk about, and also the Paycheck Protection Program as well. The second act that I mentioned, the Families First Act, that's the one that includes the expansions of paid leave and unpaid leave. So these would include the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act and then the Emergency Family Leave Expansion Act. And the reason why I want to cover all of these today, at least somewhat, is because altogether they create kind of a scheme that are going to govern how businesses operate, especially small businesses operate over the course of the rest of this year. The paid and unpaid leave acts are both set to expire at the end of this year, but the way they work and the way that they're intended to work kind of dovetail with the CARES Act stuff. Okay, so what do business owners need to understand about all this? Here's the big takeaway from this presentation that I want everyone to write down. This is your main strategic goal for this year. That is, stay liquid. What that means is you need to maintain cash reserves and cash flow to weather what is coming. And actually, not just what is coming, what is happening right now, to be quite honest. And the reason why I say that is because the paid leave and the expansions to paid leave and unpaid leave, which is actually paid leave, as I'll get into here shortly, they're going to create new obligations for small businesses that y'all have not had before, and you're going to have to pay for it. The upshot of that is that you will get a fully refundable tax credit next year to cover everything that you pay to your employees under these new acts. The EIDL and the SBA Paycheck Protection Program programs are there to help fund the obligations of business owners under these paid leave acts, namely, most importantly, to take care of employees. And we'll get into that in a little more detail here shortly. So keep this liquidity goal in mind. And so when I'm advising some of my own clients right now in terms of how they need to navigate these things, I tell them, all right, these are your obligations under the leave acts, but beyond that, you need to be looking at other sources of either reducing expenses or other sources of short-term funding in order to maintain your liquidity provision. Because if you can make it through this year, chances are you should be okay. But if you don't make it through this year, well, you're going to be out a lot of money and it's going to be bad for everybody involved. So where should people be looking in terms of improving their liquidity? Well, they can look towards the new SBA programs that are out there. But the problem with those, at least right now, is that they're not being funded adequately by Congress. So I'll have a call to action later on for y'all to light up the phones of your congressmen and senators and say, hey, fund this thing. You're killing us right now with these shutdowns. But beyond that, you need to take a very hard look at some of your other big overhead expenses and reducing those. One of the biggest opportunities that business owners have right now is to renegotiate their leases with their landlords. Landlords are small businesses too, and they're in kind of the same boat as everybody else. They need to get some money in to cover their mortgages, loans, other operating expenses for managing their properties. I mean, their biggest objective at this point in time is just protection of the asset, and that's it. And if they can protect the asset, they'll be willing to forego, if they're smart anyway, the additional windfall that would come with the rent payments otherwise. So be proactive, call your landlords. I'm seeing lots of cases right now where landlords are affirmatively and proactively reaching out to tenants, just saying, hey, let's talk about this. Let's find something that works for everybody, because what the landlord does not want is for their tenants to go out of business and the landlord to have no effective recourse to go collect on their lease later on. So
I think that's a great point that you mentioned, and thank you for kind of touching on the landlord's perspective, because that is a big concern that, we're hearing from businesses, some of them that were hesitant or on being able to even make their rent payments, their mortgage payments, and things of that nature. And that's why our city kind of listened to that feedback that we had received from the surveys and had created that initial grant fund, which really got tapped out. So they paused that in day one. So it's nice to see that you're giving that perspective of, there's some of them that are willing to work, or some, if you reach out to them, that will be more understanding, because what they don't want is for their assets to kind of fall and their ability to even maintain it. And you are their source to maintain that.
Yeah, I mean, Basically, the rule of society is this, is that everybody owes something to somebody. And once you understand that you can find creative solutions to improve your own position and bargain with other people and, figure out what's going to work to help you survive and get through this.
Excellent. We've got a couple of quick comments that I wanted to pull on here before you transition. I know you have more steps that you're going to share. So it looks like we have a comment from Brian Head just saying hello. He has a longer comment. We'll pull that one a little bit later to share. And then we also have on here former Mayor Pro Tem Alberto Garcia. I know he's watching. We have Councillor Voles, who's thanking you and I and the Chamber for providing resources for our community, including this webinar. Thank you, Councillor, and all of our councillors that are on here for staying in touch with our business community and being able to share these to your followings and outreach our message further. It really helps. So keep firing away, Mike.
All right. So let's start talking about new federal laws. And before I get into the details, I just want to, preface this with a little bit of a disclaimer. I am the attorney, I got to keep everybody out of trouble, but, most importantly, myself. The thing to understand about these federal programs is that, and these federal laws, is that these were things that were pieced together within a matter of days, maybe weeks, and they are rapidly changing, rapidly evolving. So if you're watching this right now on April 16th, 2020, this may be good information. If you're watching it a month from now, 2 months from now, it may be out of date. So please be mindful of the ever-changing legal landscape. And when in doubt, certainly consult with an attorney or an accountant, because these are all things where when you get into the weeds of the actual regulations themselves and say the qualifications for some of these programs, it's very much something that has to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. And so what applies to one business may not apply to another business. So just keep that in mind, please. So let's talk about the CARES programs first. First thing to keep in mind is that right now, I do not believe that these programs are available because of the lack of funding. So again, please call your congressmen and senators right now to get those things going. But that said, the way these applications are being handled right now is on a first come, first served basis to get these emergency loans. So what you want to do right now, if you're a business owner, is you want to get everything ready and submit the application if you actually can. Now, when I was looking at the SBA website right now, it's at sba.gov. I know you cannot submit an application right now for the EIDL program, but you may be able to submit one still for the Paycheck Protection Program. So stay on top of those things and do what you can to get first in line for those. So let's talk about the EIDL program first. So the EIDL program is, well, first, EIDL stands for Economic Injury Disaster Loan. And so historically, EIDL loans have been in place or offered by the SBA in areas in which a business has suffered a economic injury and the business is located in a disaster zone, and they are unable otherwise to get financing from other places for one reason or another. Congress has expanded EIDL through the CARES Act to service businesses for reasons directly related to the spread of COVID-19. What's being afforded right now is a $10,000, I think they call it in advance, but it's something that does not have to be repaid. So it's almost like a $10,000 handout. So for that reason, I think this is one of those things where it's kind of self-evident why this money, why these funds dried up so quickly. It's just, here it is. Here's $10,000 to help cover your revenues. To qualify for it, you have to show that you're a small business, you have an economic hardship. I think the main thing is to make sure that you qualify as a small business. Now, I'm pretty sure that most of the members of the Chamber of Commerce are going to qualify as small businesses. The SBA website has it's a tool on there to see whether you do qualify as a small business. Typically, what the SBA is looking at is the number of employees that a business has, and then also the amount of revenues that the business has. And they'll vary those numbers depending upon the industry. So if you're in the farming industry, there'll be different qualifications than if you're in the tech industry, for example.
Right.
They standardize all those different things. So if you have questions as to whether you qualify as a small business, go to the SBA website, use their tool that they have up there, and that'll let you know.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I think that's a great point that you mentioned about the demand that was on there. And I know we've seen a few banks, First Bank was one of those that kind of paused because of the volume of loans that they have been receiving. So definitely just being mindful that some banks may have paused, but others like US Bank, for example, and other folks in our community allow for you to sign up for updates. So if you're interested in the EIDL program or PPP, you go to their website, you fill out that form, and they'll alert you as they're continuing to open up those processes further.
yes. All right, so let's talk about the SBA Paycheck Protection Program. So this is a program that is designed to provide a loan to employers and businesses to help cover their operating expenses with an emphasis upon covering the payroll expenses of employees, and then also cover some other expenses such as rent, mortgages, other overhead, things like that. The loans have a 1% interest rate, APR, but beyond that, the big deal with these loans is that they may be forgivable loans, meaning that the SBA may ultimately forgive these loans if the employers follow the rules. And in terms of the rules, the basic rule is that you need to make sure that you spend 75% of the loan money on your employees and on payroll. Okay? So let's talk about this in a little more detail. And then one thing to keep in mind here, just kind of an advisement with regards to the PPP loans. You getting a PPP loan may impact your business's access to unemployment insurance benefits. I haven't looked at this in more detail. I'm just throwing this advisement out there, just something to consider, okay, before we go further. All right, so who can apply for these loans? So generally speaking, small businesses can apply for these PPP loans. Doesn't matter whether you have employees or whether you're a sole proprietorship, namely you're a self-employed person, you have no employees. Any type of small business that, or any type of business that qualifies as a small business is eligible for these loans. In terms of how much can be borrowed, excuse me, there's basically two different paths to determine how much money can be borrowed by a business. If the employer has no employees, I need to pull out some paper here. This gets a little complicated. Here are the steps. You got to pull out your 2019 tax form. So before I go further, let me just pause here. One of the things that businesses should be doing right now, while everything is kind of shut down, to the extent that they can do it, is they should be getting their 2019 taxes in order. And the reason why is because when you look at the applications for these loans, a lot of the information, a lot of the qualifications come directly from what's on the 1040 form or the other tax schedules that are there. So now's a good time to go and do your taxes. Chat with your tax advisor, your accountant, your attorney with regards to when you actually have to pay whatever's due, because I know the federal has kicked out the filing deadline, but definitely get the forms prepared because you're going to need all this information here if you're going to want to access one of these loans. Okay. So with that said, so getting back to how much can be borrowed if you are a sole proprietorship and have no employees, basically you're self-employed. So you need to take line 31. This is the net profit line from your 2019 IRS Form 1040 Schedule C. It's the net profit amount, and so you take that number. If that number is over $100,000, you need to cap it at $100,000. And if you have no net profits from last year, then you're not going to be eligible for the loan to begin with. So you just stop. Step 2 would be to calculate your average monthly net profit. So you take that, whatever that figure from line 31 is, you divide it by 12 to turn it into a monthly amount. And then you would multiply that monthly average by 2.5. So you're going to be entitled roughly to 2.5 months worth of net profit, and that's the loan amount that you can get if you have no employees. So does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And then if you want, the other thing that you can do as a business is that you can roll in any prior EIDL loan that you took. These aren't the COVID-19 EIDL loans. These are the pre-COVID EIDL loans. So you can roll those into this loan to get a better interest rate and have a chance for forgiveness, basically. Okay?
Awesome. Yep.
All right. So that's the process generally for self-employed people. If you have employees, it gets a little more complicated. So step one, you start with the net profits figure again, so line 31, but then you add to that the total amount of compensation that you pay to your employees. This is going to include gross wages and tips, and then you can also include benefits. I'm not positive off the top of my head whether any kind of benefit or whether every kind of benefits included, but I'm pretty sure that retirement benefits and health insurance benefits count to this figure. Okay. What I'm not so sure of is whether things like stock options also count. I have to go back and go look at the details, but certainly check with your consultant on there. But long and short of it is that you're starting from the same place. You're adding your net profits, again, capped at $100,000. You're adding what you pay to your employees. Then step two would be to turn that into a monthly figure. So you divide it by 12, and then the amount of loan that you're going to get is going to be 2.5 times that figure. Okay.
Pretty simple enough.
Yes. All right. So what can these funds be used for? First and foremost, they can be used for the replacement of net profits. So you as the employer can get paid some amount of money. Beyond that, the main purpose is that these funds should be used for paying and maintaining your payroll. And in fact, to qualify for forgiveness, loan forgiveness under the regulations, 75% of the funds have to go towards payroll. Okay?
Got it.
All right. Another limitation to keep in mind is that if you're a sole proprietorship, what the regulations say is that, or self-employed, what the regulations say is that you have to use the funds on the types of things you made expenditures on in 2019. So you cannot use it to expand your business or to go into new ventures and things like that. You have to use it to kind of maintain the status quo. And the thought here is that the government doesn't want to give a windfall to businesses. They want, because that's not really the purpose of these loans. The purpose of these loans is to kind of maintain the status quo and help them get to tomorrow, first and foremost. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. So that's the CARES Act. Any questions about that?
No. But this video is going to be up, so I know that it was a lot of information. You can replay it afterwards so you can capture that. We've touched on how the industry, how attorneys, how the legal industry has been facing COVID-19. We touched on, how you should be staying liquid during this time. And the third component was how you should focus on preparing your 2019 taxes if you haven't already done so, and make sure that you have that data set in front of you. So when you are, if you or yourself are applying, or if you're consulting with an accountant, they would need that as well. We touched on preparing, if possible, the application for an SBA, EIDL, and the PPP loan program. I know Mike has one other comment that he'll likely lean on. We have a couple of people that have added in. Ann Hogan, thank you so much for watching. Larry Hoy as well for watching and tuning into this video. We have a question that's here before we leave the topic, and this comes to us from Brian Dice. The question is that there are a lot of business owners who are ready to sign their documents for the PPP loan, but they're concerned because there's some vague interpretations that are going on. And in the long term, requirements in compliance for the loan being forgiven. So I guess his question is, can you comment on if a business is considering this, but they're hesitant to because they're unsure if that might change in the future, if it might not be forgivable, what should they do, or what would you recommend?
So I have two thoughts. generally speaking, businesses are going to be entitled to rely upon the guidance that they are given at the time that they take a given action. So keep that in mind. And just as a general rule, I'm not expecting these requirements to change much. For the most part, these regulations, these limitations are statutory as opposed to regulatory. And so what that means is that Congress has passed the law. They've passed the CARES Act, and that law, in a pretty good amount of detail, sets forth what the requirements are to qualify for these loans and how they're supposed to work. Beyond that, getting to the next level, the SBA has provided some guidance in terms of what congressional intent is and how certain things should be handled, and that's where they provide the clarifications. But I think in this case, I don't think there's a lot that's changed necessarily. Now, I think that when we start looking at the various leave acts that we'll be talking about in a minute, it's a very different situation where I think that the Department of Labor is empowered far more to create important regulations that will impact businesses. So, Brian, to kind of answer your question, to distill everything down into a bottom line answer, what I would say and how I would advise my clients is, look, go apply for the loan. Don't mess around with it. Just go do it. And consequences be damned. And the reason why I say that is because we're at a point right now where businesses are facing kind of existential threats to their existence. They need to stay capitalized. They need to stay liquid. So although I like to try to be forward thinking, and I don't want to, I don't want my clients to be in a spot where they're regretting where they are in the future. I do recommend to clients, look, if you have immediate needs, you got to take care of immediate needs. You worry about tomorrow later. At some point, you just have to prioritize what really matters. And I think in this instance, getting access to immediate capital is going to matter more than anything else.
Excellent. So one of the things you and I touched on was employee handbooks and the need for that for businesses. Can we touch on that before we wrap this up? I know we're slightly over time, so I just want to get this piece of information in, maybe say one or two things and close out.
Sure. So the conversation, or at least the topic of employee handbooks, is going to be very important for the next topic that we're going to get into with regards to the paid leave acts, because employee handbooks, generally speaking, are kind of policies that employers have for their employees. Now, I know that employers generally go out of their way, or at least the attorneys for the employers go out of their way, if they're being very good, to make sure that all these policies are discretionary, meaning they're not, supposed to be contracts between the employees and the employers. But in reality, the handbooks do kind of set forth certain ground rules. And it's very important that employers be aware of what they have in their handbooks, because they could form the basis of a contract between the employee and the employer. And then beyond that, for the immediate purposes, the EPLSA and the EFMLEA both have consequences with regards to freezing the status quo between the employer and the employee as things exist, I think, as of April 1st of this year. So you can't change the employee handbooks now.
Right.
Or at least you cannot reduce benefits that are already afforded under the employee handbooks.
Okay, great to know. And, Mike is always open to different comments and questions from public. So if you have questions about the employee handbook that you want to offline ask him, I know he would be more than willing to kind of answer those for you, or at least provide you some guidance. We have a couple of comments, one that just came through on the employee handbook. So before we wrap up, I want to acknowledge, hi, Eric. Thank you for hopping on, Eric Gardner, for watching some of this video. It looks like we have, on the topic of employee handbooks, it says that a lot of employers are changing the way they're doing business. So, for example, they're adding in that curbside pickup, remote workers, etc. Can you touch on what businesses should be aware of from the liability perspective? So now that they've changed up the regular way that they do business, they're more open to different risks or things that are more unknown.
Yeah. So, and this is a great question, because really what the employee handbook does more than anything else, and why it's important for employers, is that it protects the employer from the employee at the end of the day. It sets expectations and it has important consequences, especially for the various anti-discrimination statutes, whether we're talking about Title VII under federal law or the Colorado anti-discrimination statutes. With regards to David's question in particular about liabilities, in terms of how liabilities are changing right now, because of how people are changing the way that they're doing business, let me just kind of offer this thought. Well, a couple thoughts. One, the answer is that it's kind of complicated. And the reason why I say that is because when we're talking about tort liability, liability for personal injury, for example, that happens on the premises of a business or as a consequence of doing business, really what we're talking about is a couple of different sets of rules. There's a set of rules for when the injured or for when someone is injured as a consequence of something that happens on the business's property, and those are going to fall under what's called the Colorado Premises Liability Statute. And then beyond that, we're going to be dealing with a set of claims that would arise if the injury occurs off of the property, and those are going to be subject to various negligence rules. It'd be difficult for me to go into detail on those right now because there's a whole body of case law explaining when duties are owed, when duties are not owed. Under those various provisions. What I will say is that if you're a business owner, the important demarcation line for you is if someone's on your property, you're going to owe them a duty in all likelihood. So go back and go look at your lease, figure out what your property actually is and what you're actually responsible for. That's step one. When it comes to sidewalks and curbs and things like that, those may not be on your property. And if they're not on your property, then the duties that you owe are going to be substantially less. Excuse me.
That's okay.
Throat's drying out. Throat's drying out here.
So while you are drinking up, we had a thank you from Mayor Pro Tem Garcia for sharing your expertise on the important topic. A lot of information, incredibly informative. Looks like you're hydrated. You want to finish your steps?
All right. So just kind of wrap up that thought. Pay attention to what's on your property, or at least where your property lines are, and what you're responsible for. Because if something happens on your property, you may owe a duty, and you should probably give me a call. If it's not on your property, then you're probably okay. There are exceptions to that, but it's far more likely that you owe no duty and you're okay at that point.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So we have another question. This is going to be our last question that we take up live. If you have other questions that come to mind, please be sure that you comment them into this video. Mike and I will come back. We'll answer your questions for you. But I do want to take this. It's an interesting question, so I'm going to curveball and throw it at you. We have this from Nushin. What about the legality of prescribing medicine after a telehealth session?
After a telehealth.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of what's going on right now in our medical clinics, our doctors' offices, they've restricted their patients to just serious cases. Now they're offering either a phone call, they're doing videos, they're doing the telehealth. So with that being said, is there what should be kept in mind from a legal perspective in prescribing medication after that telehealth session?
So a couple thoughts here. One, a doctor can issue prescriptions just via telephone, and after a telephone consultation, doctor does not have to see someone in person to issue any or to make any kind of diagnosis necessarily, or to issue a prescription. Now that said, what I will say is that various types of treatment and various types of prescriptions and the issuing of those treatments and prescriptions will be, it may be required as part of the applicable standard of care that the doctor actually see someone in person before making those recommendations or prescribing those medicines. It really depends upon what we're talking about.
Okay, yeah, that's great to know. I think broadly speaking, it answered the question, and then more specific. We had a lot of folks that chimed in this discussion, and I don't want to miss this comment. Brian had shared, a lot of folks don't see you, Mike, and you are on our board of directors. You're active in a lot of our annual events and our programs that we do. You're an integral part on our chamber board as our general counsel. And really over the last several years, what I always say is my secret weapon is Mike. He makes sure that our organization is taken care of and that I am taken care of. And he does that from the lens of his legal work. So we had a lot of people tuning in. Again, if you have comments or questions, please drop them in the box below. The items that we touched on, were staying liquid for your business, making sure your 2019 taxes are pulled, connecting with someone that can potentially help you with that. And we've got a list of different accountants and tax preparers and things of that nature on our website. And then being prepared to file your applications, EIDL, PPP, filing them even if you feel hesitant during this time of unknown, and your employee handbook, which is kind of your safeguard. We kept all of this information within 40 minutes, which with an attorney, I deem that successful. And if you are tuning into this broadcast for the first time, please do not let it be your last. Tomorrow, we have another one that's scheduled with our Jefferson County commissioners to visit with us about what is the county, Jefferson County, what have they done, what are they doing, and what looks ahead for our county during COVID-19. Thank you so much, Mike Lazar, for spending time with us today. I hope you have a wonderful day, stay warm, and enjoy the day.
Thank you very much.